Fresh air.
Hello and welcome to Fresh Ears, the podcast where we delve into the world of podcasting from the viewpoint of brands and businesses. I'm Neil Cowling, the founder of Fresh Air, the UK's leading podcast company for brands.
And I'm Michaela Hallam, the director of content. And so, as you know, each time we bring you an episode of Fresh Ears, it usually features a brilliant guest that we know will bring some knowledge or expertise to the world of brands and podcasts. And in this episode, we'll be talking to Lizzy Pollott, Chief Communications and Brand Officer at Acast, delving into how brands can work with podcasting on a commercial basis. And as usual, we'll make sure that you're up to date with what's happening in the worlds of podcast and audio.
And bring you Podcast Recommend, our pick of the podcasts that you should be listening to and why. Recommendations can come from colleagues, industry professionals, or anyone with good taste. So if you have a recommendation to send us, please do. But before all of that, let's get into our chat with Lizzy Pollott, Acast person, comedian, marathon runner, and owner of superb nails.
Welcome, Lizzy.
Thank you for having me. What a dream.
You look like you're living the dream in the studio at the moment. So there's quite a long title, Chief Communications and Brand Officer at Acast. What does that actually mean on a day-to-day basis? What do you do?
Good question. I'm just sort of like the hype woman, really. I just get the vibes going.
You turn up to stuff
I
and,
turn up to
look
stuff and spread
energetic.
good cheer.
Yeah.
No, so technically I'm in charge of all of Acast's PR and comms globally and our brand as well. And how that's represented, visually across audio as well and copy. And that's a global job because we are a global business in sort of 15 markets. So that's what I do.
So how much of your time do you spend in the UK then?
I mean, most of it. Pre-pandemic, I used to travel quite a lot more. I go to Sweden quite a lot because, like all good tech companies, we were founded in Sweden.
Of course.
And so we have quite a big team out there. But yeah, most of the time in the UK. But it is good to go and spend time. We have offices in America, everywhere really. So
Give us a quick history of how Acast grown, because I remember being in a room with Ross Adams, the CEO, in about 2015, and it was a tiny little outfit at that point, and now it's a massive
global
podcasting
enterprise.
Yeah.
monster. But how's it changed in that time? Has it just expanded, or has it changed what it does?
Well, expanded a lot. So we're 10 years old. So we were founded in 2014, as I said, in Sweden. And then the UK quickly followed. And that's where you would have met Ross. So we essentially were founded because Acast invented what is known now as dynamic ad insertion in podcasting. So the ability to insert an ad the minute someone listens to a podcast rather than having it sort of baked in. That was a really cat-handed brief explanation, but I'm sure you guys all know what that is.
We know what you mean.
And from that, we've sort of grown into this, for want of a better explanation, marketplace. So we basically, we host 125,000 podcasts around the world, and then we work with thousands of advertisers, and we essentially match those advertisers with the podcasters. But it's an interesting business because we're part tech company, part media company, part entertainment company, part data company. But yeah, so when you met Ross, it was probably just him and a few other people in a room not far from here in King's Cross, actually. And since then, we've become a public company. So we're listed on the NASDAQ in Stockholm. We've grown massively. As I said, we're in 15 markets. We're big in America. We are the second biggest globally, according to Podtrac, if you read Podtrac. So yeah, it's been a massive explosion of growth, but I'd say that's also been driven majority by the fact that podcasting has exploded, as we all know, in many different ways. And that evolution just continues to grow and grow and grow, right until now and beyond. So it's been a journey. I've been there for 6.5 years of it, which feels like a lifetime in podcasting.
So much has changed in 6.5 years in podcasting.
Yeah.
It's incredible. So it's this kind of junction between creativity and podcasts and tech.
Yeah.
So we were talking just before we started this conversation today about the self-serve ad platform. How does that work versus the other kind of opportunities that you have for brands particularly?
Yeah, so podcast advertising, as we all know and have loved it for years and years and years, has been based around, primarily it was ads, sort of the radio style, brand recorded ads and sponsorships, the beautiful host read ads, which is what podcasting became so famous for, and then latterly branded content, as you guys know all too well. But until a few years ago, for a brand to actually be serious and to actually spend money on podcast advertising, you had to have quite sizable budgets because because the tech wasn't there to be able to make it as scalable and as automated as possible. It took a lot of sort of resource from sales teams going back and forth, working with you on your budget. What do you want to target? How are we going to spend that money? Whereas we built a platform which allows anyone in theory to log on with a minimum budget of, I think it's around £500, and run your own podcast advertising campaign with very little human interaction needed, which you can decide if that's a good or a bad thing in this day and age of AI. But it's good because that has opened up podcast advertising to people of all, people and brands of all sizes. We have a lot of podcasters who run their own campaigns to promote their shows as well. And then in turn, that has meant that more revenue has flowed to more creators. So in the olden days, it was just the big podcasts that were getting all the revenue. And what we've tried to do is democratize that so that now, even if you're getting 100, 200 listens a week, you can be on our self-serve platform and an advertiser could go, you know what, you're perfect because you are reaching my target audience, let's say in a very specific town, for example. Here's a brief. So yeah,
that's really interesting because again, podcasting, it's about the most passionate audience, and they're going to then help you convert. So, but if it's a self-serve opportunity, does that mean that you could pretty much pick any podcast? Because again, part of that message is around authenticity and making sure that your brand fits authentically within the personal brand of the podcaster themselves. How do you ensure that marriage is right? If people have got access to a self-service mechanic where they could, in theory, pick any podcast.
Well, you say in theory they could pick any podcast, but it also depends on their budget. So obviously, if you've only got quite a small budget, you're probably not going to be able to afford to run a campaign with, I don't know, someone like Shag Married Annoyed at that stage. But you know what? I say it is automated. It is automated and it has relieved a lot of the pressure in terms of like manpower or woman power, in terms of running a campaign. But you know what? We are still the experts and we still want to offer, people still need guidance. We get a lot of brands who are coming to us for the first time. They're not used to spending on podcasts. So they actually need a bit of hand-holding in terms of us saying, well, actually, you'd be better off if you spread your budget across this kind of campaign, these kind of titles, you went for this kind of targeting, you're going to see much better returns. So I would say that it blends it's a beautiful blend of both the sort of the robots and the humans still. And I don't think that will ever go away because, I don't think there's any replacement for knowledge and expertise in podcasting, which is what Acast has built up over the last sort of 10 years. But
and how do you see that brand penetration at the moment? Because it sometimes feels like everybody knows about podcasting, all brands, they've been there, done it, or they're in it. But actually, in truth, it's still quite a small fraction of the market, isn't it? There's still a lot of growth to go.
Yeah. So we, a lot of our work at Acast, so I work in obviously PR marketing. It's not just about getting brands who already spend on podcasting to spend more or getting them to spend on different types of podcasts. As you say, there is a big job about just educating the market who don't even realise that podcast advertising is a thing. And when you look at the fact, for example, in the UK, keep me honest, is it still only about 40% of people listen to podcasts? Is that right?
Less than that, yeah.
Less than that. Yeah. There's still so much room for growth for people, audiences to come into podcasting, which then means there's going to be even more growth for more types of brands to come in who haven't considered it. So I think we all collectively have such a job to do in terms of PRing our industry because we all know how effective it is, how creative it is, how cost effective it can be as well compared to other channels. But I still think we've got to bang the drums in media agencies, outside of just our podcasting bubble. But it is exciting, when we get new brands coming to our self-serve platform who have never spent on podcasts. And although on the one hand you might think like, oh, well, that's more work for us because we've got to hold their hands. We're like, no, please tell all your friends as well just what the returns that you're seeing. And so we can steal more share from radio. I didn't say that. And other forms like TV. I didn't say that because we all know the best campaigns are 360 campaigns. But anyway.
and on that, because you talk about stealing budget from radio, there's a risk, isn't there, that you basically become a lazy buy because a brand just says, oh, take the radio ad, stick it on a podcast.
Yeah.
How do you try and make that not happen?
Yeah, in fact, you know what, I did myself a disservice when I said, the radio style ads, because we would never recommend anyone do that. We have these conversations with clients all the time. I'm sure you're all too aware, like creating an ad for a podcast is a very different experience. You're not trying to cut through noise of, someone driving down the M25 or sitting in an office with loads of people talking. You've got to literally shout at people to get through on the radio. It's an intimate, as we know, lean-in experience. It's got to be creative. It's got to be tailored for the audience. So, whenever we do have clients that want to just do that for sake of resource, just stick their ad on. We're like, no, have you thought about X, Y, or Z? And also it's really exciting for us as well to try and push the boundaries of that creativity and innovation, just as you guys do, whether that's, things like 3D audio or just different styles, really. So, yeah. Don't just stick your radio ad on a podcast is my short answer.
Hear, hear.
Yeah, I think we're back that up. I was going to ask exactly the same question, actually. So talk about the different sorts of ad insertion that you can have on the platform, because we talked about the built 30-second ad.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the things that creatively I find most exciting is the idea of the kind of short segment where it's that kind of hybrid between a long form podcast and a 30-second ad, but you still have space for creativity and depth and nuance in that.
Yeah, so we work just, with you guys a lot on branded content. And as everyone knows, that can be as short as a small, a short segment, which is what you've just described, or as big as a whole series. And for us, it's about whatever's right for the advertiser. So, we have different formats, or episode takeovers, for example. And we just find this so successful because, native, what you might have called in the old days advertorial style content. I was an intern at Glamour magazine in like 2004. And no, the reason I'm saying that is because I remember then one of my jobs was putting together advertorials for like herbal essences around Desperate Housewives.
Right.
So whenever I say the word advertorial to some of the young guns in the office, they're like, what's she talking about?
No, but a great advertorial is one that you don't spot as an advertorial in the first place.
Exactly. And you know what? That's some of the biggest compliments that we enjoy seeing, is when someone has listened to what we would deem a branded episode or a branded segment and they say, oh, I didn't even realise it was an ad, but I now want to go and buy that car or buy that lottery ticket, which it means it's a job well done. It's like a longer form of a host-read sponsorship, right, which we all know is so effective because it is the podcaster that people listen to every week and trust, delivering a message in their own tone, but getting to play around with, say, branded segments or whole episodes means you can be far more creative with it, whether it's having a guest on or, we've done ones with the National Lottery and Shag Married Annoyed where Chris and Rosie went to one of their lottery projects, which was a cafe, and spent the day working in the cafe, which just is an interesting environment you wouldn't normally hear those podcasters in, so it makes it engaging for everyone. I feel like I'm teaching my grandmother how to suck eggs.
No, not at all. And but this is the interesting bit. I think people need to think harder about the context, the contextualization of the media that they're using and they're choosing to spend money on. And audio is one thing, but even within the broad audio spectrum, there are so many different ways of wrapping it.
Context is queen, and you've got me on one of my favourite soapboxes, which is contextual targeting and podcasting as well, which we launched a few years ago. Podcasting is really well set up if a cookieless world ever transpires. We know that's been slightly either delayed or nixed, but whatever, because we don't rely on cookies for targeting, And so what we do now is we transcribe all of our podcast episodes and then advertisers can target against keywords or phrases, which is super smart because, someone could be having a conversation about what they're going to have for dinner, what they're going to cook for dinner on Sunday, and then we can put in an ad for a supermarket or a meal delivery service, all based on context. And you're so right, it makes it so much more effective when it feels like it's a natural part of the fabric of the podcast and it's been thoughtfully done rather than, a jarring handbrake turn.
Exactly so. And it'll hark back to the conversation that we had on the last episode of Fresh Ears with Steve Pratt from Pacific Content, because that was all about how you actually need to create something that is a rewarding piece of content and people are going to want to listen to in its own right, rather than just having an interruptive thing that you're kind of like, wait till I get back to the thing that I was here for in the first place. So the harder you think about the creative, the more likely you are to get somebody to engage with that and people feel like it's time well spent.
I feel like this is folklore in podcasting now, but if I didn't mention Adam Buxton, because
yes.
Adam Buxton is obviously the king. If you haven't listened to his sponsorship reads where he effectively makes a mini song or a little play or something every time, but it's hilarious because we get people email us saying, oh, I heard this advert for The Economist on Adam Buxton. I want to hear it again. But when I hit play, I got a different ad. And I'm like, that's dynamic ad insertion for you. You're welcome. But we actually do get listeners writing to us saying, I want to hear that ad again. I mean, how often do you get that in any other kind of media?
That is the biggest prize.
I know.
You talked about 360 campaigns. Video is... I don't think we've had a brief this year that hasn't included video of some degree or another.
Yeah.
how does Acast work with video, and what do you think about it?
First of all, I think we all need to be collectively very careful when we just use the word video, because it is such a catch-all term. And actually, I think we need to segment it slightly. So there's what you're alluding to in terms of having a whole episode of a podcast as a video available on YouTube, wherever, which is, we see, it's a consumption trend amongst primarily younger audiences who are used to...
Yeah, they talk about watching a podcast.
Exactly. Right. However, then when you think about video in the terms of whether it's like short clips, promotional clips, of actually making a podcast more discoverable and driving viewers or listeners to that podcast, that's an entirely different thing for me and for Acast as well, and also incredibly valuable. I'm actually launching my own podcast next week. This isn't just some shoehorn. This isn't just some shoehorn of a mention. The reason I'm telling you this is because, I haven't launched a podcast. I launched one 5 years ago when I first started at Acast. And I didn't have any video assets because I'd recorded a few things just without a video setup. And I have never felt so invisible. I've felt like if I don't have video assets just to promote this, I feel like I don't exist as a podcast, which is so different to 5-6 years ago, right?
Yeah.
So actually, I've made a load of assets, which using stills and things. They're not actually the footage, but it just feels like, we've known this for a long time. Video has been a big driver of audiences. There used to be a sort of video is 4 times more effective than other mediums of driving listeners to podcasts. But the reason I bring all that up is because from a podcaster point of view, I think some of our podcasters, you say video to them and they immediately think, oh, I've got to do my makeup. I've got to buy, rent a studio or have a fancy subscription to whatever to record online. But actually, we would say, start small. It might not be right for your audience. Maybe your audience doesn't want to sit there for an hour and watch you and your whole episode, but actually having those bite-sized clips, which either brings in new audiences or reminds people, promotes your new episode, is a good thing. But it's becoming increasingly important to advertisers as well. You said you haven't had a brief without video in it, and it has been for us. I mean, we've been running what you might call multi-channel campaigns at Acast for years, where we've worked with a podcaster on their audio RSS podcast, but we've also perhaps extended that campaign across their social feeds, for example, or created bespoke content for social. We had one with Greg's and Help I Sexted My Boss that went viral. Oh my God, I sound so old saying the word viral. But it's
what was the other one? Viral and... advertorial. We'll keep those. We'll do explainers for both of those at the end of the podcast.
Welcome to 2006. But it's a really, really big opportunity for advertisers, because we all know campaigns that span across multiple platforms or media can be much more effective. So what we're saying to our advertisers is, be podcast first, but don't be podcast only. So if you're thinking about you want to work with podcasters because it is so effective as an audio medium, particularly some of the big signings we've made this year, we've signed people like the Fellas Studio, who include things like Saving Grace, or loads of different sort of video first creators who are then pivoting to audio as well. We're saying to advertisers, think about how your podcast campaign essentially can live and breathe through other mediums.
But it's really important, again, coming back to context, to make each of those assets work hard in the context in which they're going to live, essentially, so that you're actually looking creatively at different executions depending on what that video, where that video is going to sit.
Yeah. I find it funny because this is a relatively new concept in podcasting, but it's basically advertising 101, right? I used to work at Havas just down the road for 12 years before I came to Acast. And all these things that I'm saying now, are things that were drummed into us then. It's not a new secret.
No.
But it is quite new for podcasting. It's a new way of getting clients thinking around working with podcasts and how they can maximise what they're doing, maximise their budgets and make it as effective as possible. So it's an exciting time, I would say, for the industry.
I completely agree. I just think that the creative possibilities are hugely underestimated.
I would also say we feel that video, I've done it myself, but video in all of its forms and everything we've just spoken about, we very much feel that's going to be additive. I don't think audio is going away anywhere. I think that, podcasting will always have audio at its core, but this is just going to grow the pie for everyone. This is going to grow the potential revenue for podcasters and creators. It's going to grow the potential opportunities for advertisers, and that's a good thing for the industry. And I say audio is going nowhere because I'm a diehard audio podcast fan.
We're talking about advertising opportunities and that growing. Shall we get to the elephant in the room of open RSS?
This is what everybody's been desperate to hear about, I'm sure, open RSS. But it sounds technical, but actually it's really fundamental, isn't it, to the future of podcasting in general.
Yeah.
Open RSS is for the uninitiated. Can you just explain what Open RSS is?
Yeah, so podcasting was founded on RSS, basically. So you have one feed. This is going to sound really reductive, but let's just pretend I'm talking to a 5-year-old. I'm sure 5-year-olds listen to this podcast.
All the time.
But so you have one feed, the pipes essentially through which all of your episodes are delivered, and at the click of the button, you can send that feed to any app that welcomes RSS feeds. So any listening app, any podcast listening app. So the classics, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, all the smart speakers, all the platforms in the world. And the reason why that has made podcasting so massive and so popular and so great as an advertising medium is the potential of what you can do with an RSS feed from an advertising point of view is brilliant and endless. And so dynamic ad insertion works because, we can be updating the ads via an RSS feed at the click of a button so that you are being served the most relevant ads. It's easy for creators because podcasters don't have to think about 20 different logins or 20 different platforms to deal with when they want to just publish an episode. It can be done at the click of a button. And I think that, there's different models have emerged, and I don't think they're a bad thing at all. What I'm not saying is it's open RSS or nothing. Actually, for this industry to continue to grow, we need to embrace all the different ways of, there are closed platforms. There are other, for example, with YouTube, you need to upload your podcast episodes to YouTube as individual videos and so on and so forth. So what I'm not saying is it's RSS or the highway. No, that doesn't even work as a pun. But I do think it's something that we need to preserve just for especially audio RSS podcasting to continue to flourish and continue to grow and continue to be easy and make it as easy as possible for podcasters and advertisers and listeners as well to access podcasting as we know and love it.
Because that phrase, listen wherever you get your podcasts, relies on an RSS feed going everywhere, doesn't it? Otherwise, you have to say you can only listen to this on Spotify or you can only listen to this on Amazon or whatever.
Yeah, it's just a lot of admin, isn't it?
It's a pain in the arse. That's what it is.
On the other side of the coin, to the open RSS feed, there's a conversation that you and I have had previously about the opportunities to create extra benefits to your community as a brand or business by ring-fencing content for kind of subscription-only purposes, or if you're a publisher and you want to reward people, or we've talked a lot about the sports industry, you want to create extra content for your community. How would you go about that as a viable commercial opportunity?
Yeah, and we think that creators should be allowed to monetize and build that community in whatever way that they think, whether they want to. So, there are loads of platforms out there. Patreon is obviously one of the biggest in terms of giving exclusive benefits to paying listeners. We have our own product at Acast, where you can offer ad-free feeds, for example. Some people don't want to listen to ads. They just don't want to engage with it. So they'll happily pay £3-5 a month to listen to their favourite podcast ad-free. But that building, the community building thing is the most important aspect of podcasting. And I think that, whether it is exclusive content, whether it is even, private events or meetups with podcasters or exclusive merch, we would encourage all of it because the deeper you can build that community around your podcast, the more successful it's going to be. I mean, there are some phenomenal examples of podcasts out there that do it so well. And, when new podcasters are just starting out and they say, it's a lot, I've got to think, should I be setting up a Patreon? Should I be doing that? I'm thinking, yes, just go for it, because the more, everyone's going to be different. Your listeners are going to want to engage with you in different ways. So just give them the choice to pick the route that's best for them. So we very much see it as being complementary and a big part of podcasting. I mean, shock that as what was born as an ad marketplace is saying, yes, please do listen ad free. But that's because the creator gets to make money just in a different way,
So the other element that you do with advertisers is, we've already touched on it, creating branded content, branded series, and the latest you've got is Rich Beyond My Wildest Dreams with Euro Millions. Tell us about that.
Have you seen it? It looks so sick.
Ace. It looks
and
brilliant.
Although it's my company, I had nothing to do with it, so I can say that I'm not blowing my own trumpet. Yeah, so this is it's a really simple idea, but aren't some of the best ideas the simplest ones?
Absolutely.
Where we basically have some of the biggest podcasters in the UK answer the simple question of what would you do if you won, I think it's £200 million.
Yeah.
But you can imagine how that just really lends itself to some brilliant conversations and brilliant content from the ridiculous. I don't know if you've seen, we had an episode with Staying Relevant with Pete Wicks and Sam Thompson, but through to more serious conversations as well, because, some people probably have much more altruistic ideas than starting a llama farm or something. I think I'm getting that confused with something else. But that's been a really great thing for us because it's been a really slick production across video, across audio, lots of promotion. We've done some really fun experimentation in order to drive listeners. So the episode featuring the guest also appears on their own RSS feed. So you'll open up the Staying Relevant feed and the whole episode will be there for normal but listeners of that podcast to listen to as a way of driving listeners to the podcast. And it's been really effective so far. And it's I think it's also just a lot of fun. I would say that in podcasting at the minute, because there is such a diversification in terms of format and in terms of playing around with advertising formats, it's such a great time to experiment and just try things. And if they don't work, don't do them again. If they do work, do more of them. So
is that true? I mean, I've seen a lot of chat recently about the idea that actually the only successful podcasts are celebrities talking to each other.
I disagree.
What's your favourite non-celebrities talking to each other format? And genuinely, is there room for really odd experimental stuff out there, or is really the only commercially viable format simple chat?
I disagree with you, and I'm not to be all on message, but coming back to our earlier point, our self-serve platform is designed to make podcasts of all types discoverable to more advertisers. And also what we're really trying to encourage advertisers to do is think about audience first buying rather than podcast first buying, right? So we have got a whole suite of interesting, a lot of AI driven clang, I said the buzzword AI, targeting tools, which allow advertisers to get really close to the audience they want to reach, not the podcaster they want to reach. And we're trying to educate people that, I'm sure you have very diverse listening habits, right? I listen to the big celeb podcasts as much as I listen to random niche podcasts, where one of my favourite is called Boys Don't Cry, and it's just two, and I hope they don't hear this because it sounds like I'm really doing them down, but just two regular guys talking about a different romantic comedy each week. And I discovered that because I was obsessed with Forgetting Sarah Marshall, and I wanted to find someone talking about it. I found these guys and now I'm hooked. Anyway, all this to say is I am probably even more engaged with them than I am with some of the big celebrity podcasts. So for an advertiser, that's incredibly valuable, because if these guys are telling me that I should go and shop here, or I should, sign up to this service, I'm probably even more likely to do it. So this was a very long answer to say that no, not only the big celebrity podcasts can earn money, but we have to be realistic. If you are a big celebrity podcast, you're going to be having millions of listens, and the potential, you're probably going to be sold out with advertising, and we can charge a high premium for that. But I do think, there are a lot of podcasters more and more who can make a decent living out of podcasting, even if they don't have, 1 million followers on Instagram. In fact, we've got lots of examples at Acast of people who've given up their jobs or are able to, go down in hours in their regular job because their podcast is bringing that income. So
finally, talking about new podcasts, we can't leave without giving you a chance to have an actual plug of your actual new podcast that is launching. Is it live now?
Well, no, I mean, the feed's live, but I'm having some back-end technical issues, which is hilarious seeing as I work in podcasting. But no, nothing to do with Acast, don't worry. No, the Bit Fit, Bit Funny is what it's called, and it will be out in the next week or so. It's essentially me talking to comedians about running and stuff, but it's combining my two passions, which are running and comedy, because I do stand-up comedy. But it's actually just a secret front for me to be able to mine comedians' brains and get loads of advice and experience. So far I've recorded with Magic Radio's Tom Price, musical comedian Rob Deering, radio legend Jeff Lloyd, and a brilliant comedian called Vic Slayton. But it's just a lot of fun. It's so weird. I spend all my time talking about podcasting, and I forgot it's actually really fun to make a podcast.
Well, I hope you're going to say the same after appearing on this episode of Fresh Ears. Thank you very much to Lizzy Pollott from Acast, Chief Communications and Brand Officer. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you to Lizzy. So now it's time to let you know what's been going on here at Fresh Air Towers.
I think we should talk about Boots Online Doctor, which is produced by the brilliant Ollie Seymour. It's called Weight Loss 360, and it's both an audio and a video podcast, and it is fact-based advice for people wanting to lose weight the sensible way. When we say the sensible way, I think we're talking 360 holistically. It's not all about calorie counting or working out till you can't walk anymore. It's kind of taking all of your lifestyle factors into account and understanding how that can work for you. And a brand new episode came out yesterday.
Hosted by the brilliant Helen Thorne. You might know her from Scummy Mummies. And this is such an area where podcasting comes into its own, I think. You can find all sorts of advice, obviously, on weight loss. And you can skim read that stuff, or you can really get into the meat of what it means and how it works. And Boots as a brand, an authority on the high street, an authority in pharmacies, the people who can be trusted to bring you stuff that you actually rely on.
Oh, I think that's the thing that makes the difference. You can get so much kind of stuff from the internet or influencers, but you don't know what to believe. And I think that this is where it comes down to, expert-based advice for people who want to know exactly what to do to help themselves.
So watch it on YouTube. Find it on your favourite podcast app. It's called Weight Loss 360, and it's from Boots Online Doctor. Right, let's talk bins.
Yes, let's talk bins. Okay, so we did toilet talk with Steve Pratt in the last episode, and this week we'll be talking trash. This comes from a conversation that I had with a friend who has just commissioned an actual talking bin. Well, multiple talking bins, actually. So she's using audio through a council initiative to incentivise people to stash their rubbish in the bin rather than just walk past it and put it on the street and litter the street.
And the way to do this is get the bin talking to you.
Get the bin talking to you. So essentially, if you lift the lid on the bin, it will make a sound. It will speak to you. It will say something. But the huge challenge is, what is that bin actually going to say? And how is that going to make people want to open the lid and put their rubbish in it rather than not?
And how are they cracking this? How are they working out what it should say?
Well, that's the challenge, I think. So I know that they've got one, for example, outside the local school, which I think they're picking spots that are particularly bad for litter. And so how do you incentivise a teenager to put litter in the bin versus maybe one in the town centre where it's going to be a completely different audience? So, what would the bin say? How would they say it? What is the audio identity of a bin?
When it finally happens, please can you go and record it? And then we'll play it on this to see what the result is.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to hearing it myself.
Superb. And then sonic identities. This is the other thing we've been talking about a lot this week, because Veritonic, who are a brilliant company, have done a survey about how brands' sonic identities resonate with people and how people remember sonic identities. Now, this is something that you and I could fill about a week talking about.
We might have to limit how long we talk about this.
Can you briefly say why you're an authority on sonic branding, please?
I have the privilege of having been part of the commissioning team for the BBC Sounds sonic identity, music, radio, podcasts.
There's music to go with that, right?
There is music to go with that as well. And it was the way that the music works with words, and eventually the idea is that you could take away the words and that sonic identity would still be kind of imprinted on your brain, and you'd say the words yourself.
The other good example of that is McDonald's, where it used to be "I'm loving it," right? Because it used to be the three notes. I'm not going to try and sing them, but
please. No, don't.
And then it finished with "I'm loving it," but they never use that now. They just use the notes.
Exactly so.
You sort of finish it off in your own head, don't you?
Yeah, and it comes from that time when you would twist the dial on a radio and you'd only know whether you'd arrived at your station because you'd hear the kind of sonic identity of the radio station. But in a world where it's on demand and where you need to know who's bringing you that content, an audio identity is so important.
And I think people know audio identities without thinking they know them. Actually, if you asked a person on the street what the Netflix sonic identity is, they wouldn't necessarily be able to tell you, but it's that... That's it.
Also, even the word sonic identity, it's an audio logo, isn't it?
It is.
Essentially.
But it's not a jingle. Can we please never say the word jingle again? Because it's not that. It's much more. It's also a tone of voice. I think, if we look at the numbers, Veritonic found that 50% of podcast listeners report interacting with a brand's sound identity more than with their visual identity. 64% of people report feeling more connected to a brand when it has a sonic identity as opposed to brands that only have a visual identity. And whether that's true or not in the wider world, I'm not sure. But I think that so many brands think really hard about what they look like. I can tell you exactly what Fairy Liquid looks like. I have no idea what it sounds like.
And it's surprising how many conversations that we have with brands when we say, are there any kind of ingredients from your identity that you want to bring into a podcast? And it's the first time they've thought about what they sound like. What do you sound like? What's your audio personality?
So what are the ingredients there? We've got music, which is the sort of traditional jingle thing, but you've also got talent.
Yeah, and sonic identity, we can come back to talent, but it's like going back to your jingle thing, it's not just music. The Netflix thing isn't music.
No, and HBO is white noise.
Yeah.
If you're American, you hear white noise, you assume it's HBO. But when I mean talent, I mean a voice. Kevin Bacon, for instance, is EE, which is astonishing because I expect it takes him about 1 hour of his time every year to do that voice session, but Kevin Bacon is EE.
I really like Paddy McGuinness's association with the travel brand On the Beach, actually. I think it's thinking about somebody who personifies your brand and brings it to life and gives it a personality.
It's also language, isn't it? It's the words you use, it's how you say them. It could be an accent, as you say. Paddy McGuinness, has a particularly strong accent. But you tie all those things together. You tie sound design and talent and the use of vocabulary. And that is a sonic identity that can be used in your ads, in your TV, in your podcast. And it's so important these days to have something that unites all those places, all those channels.
And we often have the conversation as well about what are you not? I think that is also really helpful in defining what you are. It's the ingredients that you absolutely are not.
So 64% of listeners feel a stronger bond with brands that utilise cohesive sound identities. Amen to that. Right, so time for our podcast recommendation, which comes courtesy of soon-to-be-married Fresh Air producer Clara Kavanagh.
And this is being recorded on her actual birthday as well. Happy birthday, Clara.
Hello, I am Clara Kavanagh, and I am recommending a podcast this week that has been recommended to me many, many times. And I just, I never really bothered listening to it because I didn't really think much of the man. I just kind of thought he was the sexy fella from 50 Shades with all the blindfolds and whips. And I was just a bit like, ugh. But my, oh my, was I so wrong? It is a beautiful episode of Desert Island Discs with Jamie Dornan. I've listened to this 3 whole times. Each time I've laughed at different parts. I've welled up at different parts. There's just something so simple and raw and kind of beautiful about it. He talks about his life, his family, his friends, growing up, his parents' love story, going to festivals with friends, meeting his wife, and the memories and music that he shared with each of them. And it allowed me as a listener to get to know Jamie on a whole other level. And you see the dimensions of his life and how he's so normal and really unbothered about fame, which, I don't know, I kind of thought otherwise. It just shows how you can really get to the heart of someone through the songs that define them. And I couldn't recommend it anymore. If anything, just for his fantastic music choice. Thank you.
There we go. Thank you, Clara. Clara's recommendations for things I tend to find are excellent. From what celebrity gossip is going around to what music to listen to and obviously what podcast to listen to. So that's a decent recommendation there. That's the end of this episode. Hope you've enjoyed it, found it useful, insightful. You've got this far in the podcast, so hopefully you've not given up, which is nice. If you'd like to find out how to get started on your own podcast, for your brand, for your business, then check us out. Our website is freshair.audio. Please do get in touch.
Plus, you can sign up for, in Neil Cowling's words, the best weekly newsletter in the world, the Fresh Air newsletter. You can do that on our website or at LinkedIn. Thank you very much for listening.
Fresh